In September of 2025, neighbors on a quiet street in the Hollywood Hills started noticing a smell. Most assumed it was a dead animal, maybe something that had gotten into the walls of a nearby house. A few people mentioned it to each other in passing. Nobody did anything about it for a while, which is how these things usually go. Then the smell got worse, and someone finally called the police. Officers checked the area and traced the source to a Tesla parked alone on the side of the road. It had been sitting there for roughly a month. No one in it, no one claiming it, no parking tickets pulled. When they ran the plates, the registration came back to David Burke, a 21-year-old musician from Houston who had performed at Coachella 6 months earlier, whose debut album had charted in the top 15 of the Billboard 200, whose most streamed song had crossed 1 billion plays. When officers opened the trunk, they found human remains, dismembered, decomposed beyond visual identification. Forensic teams went to work. Dental records confirmed the identity within days. The body belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She was 14 years old. She had been reported missing from Lake Elsinore, California, 17 months earlier in April of 2024. Lake Elsinore sits about 60 miles southeast of Los Angeles, spread up against the hills above a reservoir. It's a working-class city of around 70,000 people, not the kind of place that makes the news. Celeste grew up there, on a street where neighbors knew each other's kids by name. People who knew her described someone genuinely easy to be around, the kind of teenager who made adults comfortable without performing it. She had thick, dark curls and a soft smile that appeared in every photograph anyone ever took of her. She loved Hello Kitty. She had a close group of friends, a family that was present in her life, a normal school routine. She was, by any measure, an ordinary girl from an ordinary place. David Burke was born in Houston, Texas, and by his own account was drawn to music early, not through formal training, but through the specific restlessness of a teenager with a laptop and something to say. He started posting content online as an adolescent, gaming clips mostly, with original music layered underneath. His sound was emotionally direct, in a way that felt unpolished in the right way, different from what was already saturating the internet. He built a following slowly, then all at once. In 2022, when Burke was 17 years old, he released Romantic Homicide. The song accumulated over 1 billion streams. Record labels reached out, a debut album followed, and with it came the machinery of the music industry. Profile pieces, festival appearances. I've moved to Los Angeles. By early 2025, he had a house in the Hollywood Hills, a Coachella date on the calendar, and a public profile that put his face on billboards. He was 21 years old. According to prosecutors, he had known Celeste Rivas Hernandez since she was 11. Celeste disappeared for the first time before she was ever officially reported missing. Months before the April 24 report, she had vanished briefly and then returned. When she came back, her parents sat her down and took her phone. They had grown worried about who she was in contact with and decided, as parents in that situation often do, that cutting off communication was the safest move available to them. What they didn't know, what court documents would reveal much later, was that someone had already anticipated that possibility and worked around it. A teenage friend of Celeste had been approached and handed $1,000 in cash. In exchange, she gave Celeste a new phone, a second phone unknown to her parents. That kept a line open to the outside world. According to prosecutors, the person who paid that $1,000 was David Burke. When Celeste disappeared again in April of 2024, her family reported it immediately. Investigators classified it as a runaway situation, which is standard procedure when a teenager goes missing without signs of violence or abduction. Most cases like that close within days. This one stretched into weeks, then months, with no meaningful public update and no sign of Celeste. What prosecutors allege happened in the years before she disappeared involves conduct that began, they say, when Celeste was 13 years old and Burke was 18. According to the charges filed in April 2026, Burke initiated a sexual relationship with her at that age and continued it over the following year.
Farm boy, I'll beat the shit out of him.
Are you still dating that line?
During that period, Celeste traveled with him. Photographs place her in Las Vegas, London, and Texas, where she reportedly met Burke's family. She was photographed backstage at one of his Los Angeles concerts, standing next to him, smiling. The photos circulated at the time without context. To anyone who saw them, it looked like a fan getting a moment with her favorite artist. Prosecutors say the reality was considerably different. The last time anyone confirmed seeing Celeste Rivas Hernandez alive was April 20 to 20 Lviv. She went to David Burke's house in the Hollywood Hills. The medical examiner would later determine that she died from multiple penetrating injuries, stab wounds, and rule the manner of death a homicide. 2 days after the date, prosecutors identified as the day she died. Burke took the stage at Coachella.
What's going on? This is David. We at Coachella right now, and this is my pre-show rituals.
Coachella draws close to 100,000 attendees across 2 weekends each April, held at the Empire Polo Club in Indio, California. Burke performed on April 25, 2025. By that point, according to the prosecution's timeline, Celeste had been dead for approximately 48 hours. His debut album dropped the same week. It entered the Billboard 200 at number 13. In the weeks that followed, Burke continued touring. He did press. He appeared in interviews. On the surface, nothing was unusual. Inside the garage at his Hollywood Hills property, investigators would later find what a search warrant described as evidence consistent with dismemberment. Surfaces that had been cleaned, but not thoroughly enough for forensic analyses. Blood samples collected from the garage tested against Celeste's DNA. They matched. Investigators also documented a detail that appeared in multiple subsequent court filings. Celeste had a small tattoo on her finger that read, "Shh, shh, shh, shh." David Burke had the identical tattoo on his own finger in the same location. After the remains were recovered in September 2025, the investigation moved quickly. Grand jury subpoenas went out in the months that followed. Burke's parents and younger brother, still living in Texas, were called to testify. Court records show they filed legal petitions to avoid appearing. By February 2026, public court filings confirmed that Burke was formally identified as the target of a murder investigation, with prosecutors citing what they described as evidence of foul play connected to Celeste's death. On April 16, 2026, at 5 in the afternoon, Burke was arrested at a residence in the Hollywood Hills. He was booked at 11 that night without bail. 4 days later, the Los Angeles District Attorney held a press conference, joined by the city's chief of police. The charges were first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under the age of 14, and mutilation of human remains. Because of the nature of the alleged crimes, special circumstances were attached to the murder charge. David Burke is eligible for the death penalty. Prosecutors outlined what they say happened in that house in April 2025. According to the DA's office, Celeste had threatened to go public with what Burke had allegedly been doing, to tell people what had been happening between them for the past 2 years. Prosecutors alleged that threat and what it would have meant for his career and public image is what drove what came next. They say he stabbed her multiple times inside the house. Then, in the garage, he allegedly used a chainsaw to dismember her body. He placed her remains in the trunk of his Tesla. The car sat in the garage for a period, then was moved to the street, where it remained for approximately a month before a neighbor's complaint brought officers to the block. Outside the house where Celeste grew up in Lake Elsinore, a memorial appeared within hours of the news breaking. Flowers accumulated on the sidewalk. Candles burned through the night. Strangers left stuffed animals. Hello Kitty items showed up from people who had never met her, who knew nothing about her except what the news had reported in the previous 24 hours. A neighbor named Cortez, who had lived on that street long enough to watch Celeste grow up, stood beside the memorial and spoke to reporters. She pushed back how the case had been framed in some of the early coverage. The runaway narrative, the implication that Celeste had been making choices that put her in harm's way. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was a young girl just trying to figure out life, Cortez said.
The first time I saw her, she was walking down the street early in the morning. It was during the colder months, I remember. It was just a 1 second. I was driving down the street and I saw her like big, beautiful curls. And I'm like, oh, that little girl's so pretty. And then I just went on my way.
Then she doesn't get to grow up. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was born on September 7th, 2010. Police recovered her remains on September 8th, 2025, one day after what would have been her 15th birthday. Her family attended Burke's first court appearance and sat in the courtroom while the proceedings moved through their procedural stages. When they released a public statement, it was brief. They asked that people remember who Celeste was. Not the case, not the investigation, not the headlines. Her, the girl who grew up on that street in Lake Elsinore with the thick days curls and the Hello Kitty collection, and the friends who still remembered exactly what she was like. On April 20th, 2026, David Burke was brought into a Los Angeles courtroom in orange jail clothes. He sat beside his defense attorneys. The hearing was short and procedural. He spoke once, responding to a direct question from the judge with 2 words, "Yes, ma'am." He entered a plea of not guilty. His legal team released a statement afterward. The actual evidence in this case will show that David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez and was not the cause of her death. We will vigorously defend his innocence. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for June 29th, 2026. The case is still working through the pre-trial process. No jury has weighed the evidence. No verdict has been reached. What the court record does establish without dispute, a 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore traveled to a house in the Hollywood Hills in April of 2025 and was never seen alive again. Her remains were recovered 5 months later from the trunk of a car registered to a man she had known since she was 11 years old. A man who, in the months between her disappearance and his arrest, released a debut album, went on tour, gave interviews, and performed for crowds of thousands, while investigators were quietly building a case around the garage of his house and the Tesla he'd left parked on a residential street. A man who named his most famous song "Romantic